police have found 9 bodies hanging from a bridge in Mexico City, alongside a drug cartel banner threatening rivals. Police say 10 more bodies have been found hacked up and dumped beside a nearby road.
Acapulco has become Mexico's murder capital due to a merciless drug war between gangs. Workers recover a dismembered body dumped in the middle of the afternoon.
An exclusive look into a notorious gang, an elite group comprised of ex-Mexican military members who have evolved into one of the deadliest forces working the U.S.-Mexico border. They are Los Zetas.
Se le atribuyen al menos 2,000 homicidios. En 1997 creó el grupo de Los Zetas, grupo armado del cártel conformado por exmilitares de élite y desertores.
Locked in darkness, beaten down, and stripped of everything, Osiel Cárdenas Guillén's fall was nothing short of hell. In this video, we're uncovering the brutal story of the man who created Los Zetas and the torture he endured in U.S. prisons. What you're about to hear and see is graphic and disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised.
Paraded for the cameras, these men are suspected of killing dozens of people in the Gulf Coast state of Veracruz.
After being captured, they told us of another 3 safe houses where 32 bodies were found.
Osiel Cárdenas Guillén wasn't just feared, he was a monster who built an empire out of blood and betrayal. The man who once ruled the Gulf Cartel and created Los Zetas, the most violent enforcers Mexico had ever seen, is now back in Mexico. But it's not a triumphant return. After serving 14 years in U.S. prisons, he's behind bars again, locked away in Altiplano, Mexico's most secure prison. In those years in prison, Cárdenas was tortured, isolated, stripped of everything. His life behind bars became its own kind of hell.
Osiel Cárdenas Guillén, ex líder del Cártel del Golfo y fundador del grupo criminal de Los Zetas, salió del centro penitenciario en el que se encontraba en el estado de Indiana, en los Estados Unidos. Estuvo 17 años preso por cargos de conspiración para distribuir droga. Después de salir de la cárcel, Cárdenas Guillén fue puesto a disposición de las autoridades de migración y aduana de los Estados Unidos, de ICE.
Cárdenas wasn't always a kingpin. He started out as a mechanic in Matamoros, Tamaulipas, just a regular guy trying to make a living. But somewhere along the way, the drug world sucked him in. By the late 1990s, he wasn't just in the game. He owned it. In 1999, he took control of the Gulf Cartel in the most brutal way possible. He killed his own partner, Salvador Gómez Herrera, a man he once called a close friend. That's how he earned the nickname El Mata Amigos, the friend killer. But he didn't stop there. To protect his empire, he needed something more terrifying than guns or money. He needed soldiers, and that's when he created Los Zetas.
An exclusive look into a notorious gang, an elite group comprised of ex-Mexican military members who have evolved into one of the deadliest forces working the U.S.-Mexico border. They are Los Zetas.
Los Zetas were born out of betrayal. Cárdenas recruited elite soldiers from Mexico's special forces, offering them money they couldn't refuse. These weren't regular criminals. These men were trained to kill with precision, to move like ghosts, and to unleash hell on anyone who crossed them. At first, Los Zetas were his personal bodyguards, but they quickly became something much darker. They took over territories, executed rivals, and made fear their weapon. Beheadings, mass killings, bodies left from bridges. This was their signature, and Cárdenas was at the center of it all, pulling the strings. By the early 2000s, the Gulf Cartel was one of the most powerful criminal organizations in Mexico. They moved tons of raked in millions, and left entire towns in ruins. But that kind of power doesn't last forever.
And they admit causing terror in Mexico, but they're also busy on this side of the river as well. 2 of them sat down to talk to News Channel 5's Tony Castellan. He is live from the border with the story. Tony?
Marianne, at night here, the Rio Grande seems quiet, but it is hiding secrets of kidnap and murder. These Zetas tell us they came forward because of the violence against innocent people.
In 2003, the Mexican military caught up with him. There was a massive shootout in Matamoros, bullets flying everywhere. When the dust settled, Cárdenas was in handcuffs. It was over, or so it seemed. Even behind bars, he still controlled his empire, giving orders through smuggled notes. But the U.S. wanted him. He had threatened 2 American federal agents at gunpoint, and the U.S. wasn't going to let that slide. In 2007, he was extradited, and in 2010, he was sentenced to 25 years in prison. That's when his real nightmare began.
The Zetas have moved in. They are Mexico's most violent, most depraved, most feared crime cartel, and they have settled here with a cruel vengeance.
Cárdenas didn't end up in just any prison. He was sent to USP Terre Haute, a place reserved for the worst of the worst. His days of ordering massacres and running a cartel were over. Now, he was locked in a tiny cell, 23 hours a day, with no one to talk to. He wasn't allowed to see other inmates. His mail was censored. Every move he made was watched. The guards didn't just keep him locked up, they broke him, bit by bit. The isolation was its own kind of torture. For a man who once commanded armies, this was the ultimate punishment. But even as he wasted away in that cell, the violence he had unleashed in Mexico didn't stop.
The Zetas don't just kill, they execute, and in the most gruesome ways imaginable. Bodies may show up in any number of different cities at any time, or simply disappear forever.
Los Zetas, the monsters he had created, had turned into a force of pure chaos. They were responsible for some of the worst murders in Mexico's history. Massacres of migrants, entire towns wiped out, bodies left in pieces as warnings. By 2010, Los Zetas had grown so powerful, they didn't need the Gulf Cartel anymore. They broke away, starting a war that turned northern Mexico into a battlefield. Tamaulipas, the state where it all began, became a place of endless bloodshed. Cárdenas could only watch from his cell as his creation spiraled out of control.
As difficult as this is to look at, the severed head has become a trademark for the Zetas. To look away would miss the horror of what life has become here. They are psychopaths. They believe the only protection for their souls will come from Santa Muerte, the saint of death.
In August 2024, Cárdenas was released from U.S. prison, but freedom didn't last long. He was deported back to Mexico, and as soon as he crossed the border, he was arrested again. This time, he's facing charges for drug trafficking, organized crime, and money laundering. He was thrown into Altiplano, the same prison that once held El Chapo. It's a fortress, no escapes, no bribed guards, no way out. For a man who once ruled the Gulf Cartel, it's the ultimate fall. But that's not the end of the story.
Osiel Cárdenas Guillén, el mataamigos, es originario de Matamoros, Tamaulipas. Formó parte del Cártel del Golfo, donde Juan García Ábrego era la cabeza visible. Tras la detención de García Ábrego en 1996, Osiel Cárdenas, entonces de 20 años, asumió el liderazgo del Cártel del Golfo. Supervisó el tráfico de cocaína y marihuana hacia los Estados Unidos, drogas que iban directamente a Texas y Georgia, y expandió las acciones violentas del cártel a través de la creación del grupo criminal de Los Zetas.
The battle against cartels like the Gulf Cartel and Los Zetas hasn't stopped. If anything, it's gotten worse. The US and Mexico are still trying to fight this war, but the cartels just keep adapting. New groups like the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG, are rising, using the same brutal tactics Los Zetas began. Politicians in the US are ramping up their tactics too. Donald Trump, during his 2024 re-election campaign, promised to wage war on the cartels, even pushing to label them as terrorist organizations. But promises like that are easier said than done. Cárdenas' story shows just how deep the corruption and violence go. He may be locked away, but the cartel wars he helped ignite are far from over.
Nos atacan, blindada. K8, una aguililla. K8, heridos. X13, K8. K8, K5, una aguililla, X13.
This audio is from an ambush by the Jalisco New Generation Cartel that left 14 police officers dead in the Mexican state of Michoacán. The police massacre took place in El Aguaje, a town on a key drug smuggling route from the Pacific coast. It's also near the hometown of the Jalisco cartel's leader, a fugitive kingpin known as El Mencho.
When Osiel Cárdenas Guillén created Los Zetas, he didn't just make enforcers, he built an army. He turned deserters from Mexico's elite special forces, the GAFE, into a death squad. These weren't just hitmen, they were soldiers trained to kill with precision and execute with cruelty. Cárdenas gave them power, money, and a license to kill. The Zetas started small, acting as bodyguards for the Gulf Cartel. But soon, they became a force all their own. They controlled drug routes, extorted businesses, and executed rivals in ways so brutal they sent shockwaves through Mexico. Beatings, dismemberments, bodies hung from bridges. Los Zetas made sure everyone knew who was in charge. But to make things worse, they didn't stop with the drug trade. Los Zetas branched into human trafficking, weapons smuggling, and even oil theft, taking over vast swaths of Mexico's economy. By 2010, they had grown too powerful to stay under Cárdenas' shadow. They broke away from the Gulf Cartel, igniting a war that tore northern Mexico apart.
Acapulco has become Mexico's murder capital due to a merciless drug war between gangs. Workers recover a dismembered body dumped in the middle of the afternoon.
The Zetas didn't just fight the Gulf Cartel, they fought anyone who stood in their way. They met 72 migrants in San Fernando for refusing to work for them. They left towns in ruins, terrorizing civilians and spreading their brand of violence wherever they went. Their power grew so much that by 2012, they controlled 11 Mexican states, more territory than any other cartel. But as the years went on, they began to fracture. Leaders were killed, arrested, or betrayed. By 2015, the Zetas had splintered into groups like the Cartel del Noreste, CDN, and Old School Zetas, each fighting for survival.
Los Zetas is a powerful and violent criminal syndicate in Mexico. It is considered by the U.S. government to be the most technologically advanced, sophisticated, and dangerous cartel in Mexico. They are most notoriously known as a drug cartel with an affinity for indiscriminate, brutal violence, torture, kidnapping, and slaughter.
The birth of the Zetas drug cartel can be traced back to at least January 1st, 1994, when the North American Free Trade Agreement between America, Canada, and Mexico came into effect. In protest at what they saw as capitalist neocolonialism.
While Los Zetas tore Mexico apart, their creator was rotting in a U.S. prison. Cárdenas was isolated, alone, and stripped of the power he once wielded. Guards watched him constantly, and he wasn't allowed contact with other inmates. But even locked up, Cárdenas remained a symbol of the chaos he had created. His time in prison became a warning to others in the drug trade. The U.S. doesn't forget.
Osiel Cárdenas, who headed the Gulf Cartel, recruited a group of deserters from the Mexican Special Forces to become his own private army, known as Los Zetas. The Zetas used their military efficiency to fundamentally change the game of the Mexican drug war.
So you had this drug trafficker, Osiel Cárdenas, who rose to the top of the Gulf Cartel, and he recruited people from the special forces of the Mexican military. The first set that he recruited was Arturo Guzmán de Sena. So what you saw was a change in the way drug cartels fought with violence.
Cárdenas' return to Mexico has reopened old wounds. His arrest is a victory for law enforcement, but it's also a reminder of how deep the corruption runs. The prison breaks, the massacres, the political alliances. It all points to a system that's been compromised for decades. In Tamaulipas, where Cárdenas built his empire, the government still struggles to control the violence. Local police are underpaid and easily bribed. Corruption runs so deep that even governors have been tied to cartels. The people of Tamaulipas live in constant fear, trapped between warring cartels and a government that can't or won't protect them.
It's very risky standing next to the river right now with my uniform on and looking straight over there because there can be a sniper from a drug cartel looking at us from those bushes over there, and the Zetas can be watching me right now with a sniper rifle.
The fight against cartels like the Zetas and the Gulf Cartel is far from over. New players, like the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, are filling the power vacuum, using tactics just as brutal as their predecessors. And while politicians in the US and Mexico promise to crack down on organized crime, the cartels continue to adapt. Donald Trump, during his 2024 re-election campaign, claimed that he was going to label cartels as terrorist organizations. It's a move that could bring more resources to the fight, but also risks escalating the bloodshed further. Meanwhile, the cartels are finding new ways to expand their reach, from controlling drug routes into the US to infiltrating governments and law enforcement.
The Zetas have contacts on both sides of the border, in the American side and on the Mexican side. The commander gives the order to kill, and the soldiers take care of locating and killing the target.
Osiel Cárdenas Guillén is back in prison, but the chaos he unleashed lives on. Los Zetas may be fractured, but their legacy of violence remains. The war he helped ignite between cartels and governments shows no signs of stopping, and as long as corruption and greed thrive, men like Cárdenas will continue to rise, leaving destruction in their wake. So, what are your thoughts? Will Cárdenas stay in prison, or will he escape? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next video.